Yes. Indeed. Should be that way. Okay. 1 second. Okay, we're on Mem Aleph and Mem Aleph, 41a. And about 3/4 down the line, Itmar, three quarters down the page, Itmar, Rav Levi, Chadam Mashlichus Yad Tzrich Chasaron, Chadam Mashlichus Yad Ein Tzrich Chasaron. Okay, so what's the debate here? Shlichus Yad is when a watchman touches an item. And when we say touch here, we mean that euphemistically, right? Shlichus Yad means he set his hand on it with the intention of damaging it. Now, does he need to actually damage it or not? So the question is, Shlichus Yad Tzrich Chasaron, does it need to have a depreciation, a loss? Or does the intention alone suffice? So there's debate here. Rav and Levi have a debate. One opinion says Shlichus Yad does require a loss. One says no, even the intention alone is sufficient. So let's prove it. Which person goes to which opinion? So let's prove to Stayim the Rav Hudam Shlichus Yad and it's Chasaron. Let's prove that Rav holds that Shlichus Yad does not require a loss. Just the intention alone of doing damage, it's sufficient to make you liable. The Tanya we learned, a guy was tending to his flock. He left his flock behind. He went into the city. And sure enough, as he was, buying his drinks and whatever at the convenience store, the wolf came along and grabbed some animals, or the lion came along and trampled them. By the way, the difference in terminology here is that, from what I understand, a wolf takes the food with it to its den, whereas a lion just eats it on the spot. And that's because the lion has no fear at all. Not afraid of any other, not afraid of people, not afraid of animals. He just eats on the spot. Whereas the ze'ev, the wolf, it kills the animal, then it has to schlep it away. Okay, so fine. So Potter, he's exempt. This is considered his stop in the restroom, whatever it is. It's considered normal, and there's nothing you can do about it. There's a limit to how much protection a shepherd can give. Let's say if, however, he puts his stick and his money bag on top of an animal, he's liable. So the Gemara says, why exactly does that make him liable if he put his money bag on top of an animal? He's taken it off already. So Amar of Nachman, Amar Rav, Amar Rav, but Allah, the money bag is still on the animal. So the Gemara says, so even if he puts his stuff on top of, the sheep. So the Gemara says, who cares? He never schlepped the sheep. He never pulled it with the intention of taking it. So the Gemara says, what happened was he hit it with his stick, and it ran in front of him. It ran away. So he put his money bag on the animal, and then he hit the animal to get it to move. And this is called using the animal without permission. Right? Because he has no permission to use the animal. He's just a shepherd. He's supposed to bring the animals out to pasture. And so he's supposed to be hitting wolves and lions. He's not supposed to be hitting sheep. And certainly not putting his money bag on top of it. So Gemara says, so he hit the animal, but the animal had no loss. Must be that you don't act, a loss is not a requirement for the laws of Shlichus Yad. Meaning, if you're a watchman and you damage an item, you don't actually have to depreciate the item. The fact that you took an item with the intention to damage it is sufficient to be liable, even if something else happens. And again, we'll discuss this in more detail soon. But again, the shepherd watched the animal, but he used the animal for his own permission, his own stuff to hold his money belt, and he hit it. That's sufficient to be liable in Shlichus Yad now. That now at this point, if the animal's eaten by a wolf, he is liable. Why? Because he's considered to have stolen it already, even though he didn't actually damage the animal. There's no loss. We're together? Mm-hmm. Okay. So the Gemara says, no. So the Gemara says, no. He didn't just hit it with a stick. He hit it with a stick until it actually was injured. So in this case, there was a loss, and through that loss, he acquires the animal. And now, if it's eaten by a fox or by a wolf or a lion, he has to pay. So is taken out. I'll prove it to you. The Tanya Sheikh Hisha B'Makal Shema Minah. because Rav said that he hit it with a stick. Presumably, he hit it to the extent that he actually hurt the animal. Okay, so therefore, so clearly there had to be a loss. Because Rav says that a watchman setting his hands on an item he's watching requires him to actually damage the item. That's why Rav specifically says he hits it with a stick, meaning he injures it with a stick. So Levi says it doesn't need a loss, because we know that Rav and Levi have this debate. We don't know whose opinion is which. Now that we know that Rav says you do have to have a loss, it must be that Levi says you don't need to have a loss. The intention to inflict damage is sufficient to be liable for the item. And that liability, by the way, is utter liability. So, in other words, you have a shepherd. He's considered a paid watchman, right? So, if the animal was attacked by a snake, then the shepherd is exempt. And similarly, even the fox and the lion could be an exemption. But once you stole the animal by not watching it correctly, because you intended to inflict damage, you did something to the animal with intention to inflict damage, then now if the snake bites it, you're liable. Typically a snake bite we call oinus, right? It's beyond your control. So therefore a paid watchman is exempt, makes an oath and he's exempt. But over here, even though you didn't cause it a loss, because you did something with the intention to inflict damage, even though no damage was inflicted, you would be liable according to Levi. According to Rav, you actually need to inflict damage. There must be a loss to the animal itself. Okay, my time of the Levi. What's the reason of Levi? Why no loss is required? The intention alone is sufficient. The Torah repeats the concept of shlichus yad, meaning shlichus yad again is the watchman touching. Touching is a loose word. It's euphemistic for stealing, right? It's not quite stealing because he did get it with permission, but he's stealing in the sense that he's doing something he's not allowed to do. That's why he's stealing. He's supposed to be watching it, and instead he's doing something he shouldn't be doing. He's trying to destroy it. He's using it, something like that. So the Torah speaks of shlichus yad both by shomer chinam and shomer sachar. And by shomer chinam is an unpaid watchman, shomer sachar is a paid watchman. But shomer sachar is a little different. And I say it's not different. They're the same. So Gemara says, "My mishuna, what's different?" Gemara says, "Lo tamer shlichus yad b'shomer sachar v'teisim b'shomer chinam." Why does the Torah need to repeat itself by shomer sachar? That there's the concept that you have the concept of shlichus yad, that you can damage an item that you're supposed to be watching. The Torah already specifies that a shomer chinam is not allowed to touch the item, and if he does, then he's responsible. So why do we need to repeat that by a paid watchman? Again, an unpaid watchman has the least liability, and yet if he touches it, boom, full liability now, complete. So a shomer sachar that already starts off with some liability, if it's lost or stolen, he'll have to pay for it. So then, for sure, if he touches it with the intention of damaging it, for sure he'll have to pay. He'll have full liability, just like a shomer chinam. So why does the Torah need to repeat itself? Just like a shomer chinam that's exempt from lost or stolen, sholach bayad, but if he touched it, meaning he tried to damage it, chayiv, he's liable. Shomer sachar that already has some level of liability, he would be liable in the case of lost or stolen, like kolshkein. For sure, he should be liable if he intended on inflicting damages. So why did the Torah repeat the concept of shlichus yad, of damaging the item that's being watched? So Gemara says, to tell you that when you inflict damages, you don't actually have to damage the item. The intention to inflict damages is sufficient, right? It's a guy who picks up a baseball bat and he tries hitting the guy's car. It turns out it's a Cybertruck, the new Tesla pickup truck. Doesn't really do anything to it. That's it. Now you have full liability because you intended on damaging the item. Okay. The other opinion is that it's not extra. Why? like the opinion of Rabbi Elazar that says they're both the same. What does that mean? My David Achasi. What does that mean? They're both the same. Okay, he says that they're not exactly extra. Why? Because there is some severity to a shemer chinam over a shemer sachar. Let's explain. A shemer sachar that says the item was stolen, what happens? Shemer sachar, paid watchman says the item was stolen. What's the law? He's liable. He has to pay. A shemer, okay, good. He has to pay. Let's say he says it was, got bitten by a snake. Then he makes an oath. He's exempt. Now, what happens if he lied? He actually had it in his backyard. Okay, what's the penalty? There's no kefil. There's no kefil penalty. If he made an oath, it's keren chaimesh v'alsham. So it's 20%, whatever what we in English we call 25%, plus a sacrifice. But you don't pay kefil. You don't pay twice. Now let's go back to shemer chinam. Unpaid watchman says it was stolen. How much does he pay? Nothing. He's exempt. He makes an oath. He doesn't have to pay. Let's say he lies. He says it was stolen, and he actually is the thief. How much is he paying? See, he pays right. So he pays kefil 4 or 5, right? If he sold it or slaughtered it, he would pay 4 or 5. He pays kefil 4 and 5. So in some level, there is more severity to a shemer chinam than a shemer sachar. A shemer sachar will never pay kefil for lying because the opportunity really doesn't exist. If he says it was stolen, he has to pay for it. So he can't say it was stolen and have stolen it himself because it doesn't make a difference if he's stolen himself. He'll still have to pay. A shemer chinam that is able to exempt himself with the argument of stealing, he pays kefil if he lies, if he's actually the thief. So the other opinion argues that no, actually it needed to say shlichus yad both by shemer chinam and by shemer sachar, because at some level, even though shemer sachar has better liability coverage, right? But shemer chinam actually has more severe penalties. Kefil. Shemer sachar can't pay kefil. So therefore, it's actually necessary for it to say both. The Gemara says a mandalai parach. The opinion that disagrees, the fact that you pay keren, like we pointed out many times, kefil is something that you may or may not pay, right? Simply if the robber admits, you don't pay kefil, you don't pay double. So it's actually more severe to have more. If you had to stack the liability, the severity, more liability is more severe than an occasional rare instance that you might have to pay twice. So it still is extra. You still could have the kal v'chaimer. Okay. Rava says, Rava has another point. He says, well, why can't we learn it out of a borrower? Okay, so you have a borrower. A borrower is permitted to use the item. Yet, if he uses the item with the intention to inflict damage, then he has complete liability. Even if the animal dies in the normal course of work, which is the only exemption of a borrower, he still would be liable if he tried to damage the item. Similarly, a shemer chinam and shemer sachar that have no permission to use it, for sure, if they touch it, they'll be obligated. They'll be liable. Okay, so the Gemara says Lama Nemar. So why does the verse repeat the concept of shlichus yad of damaging the item? One is to tell you that there does not need to be a financial loss. Intention to inflict damage is sufficient to have complete liability. The idach, and the other reason is shalatoymar dialav min adin lias kanidin. Mashal b'balam potter af shemachinam shemer sachar b'balam potter. 1 second. Okay. So the other thing is that by Shar there's a concept called ba'olav imay. I don't want to get too much into ba'olav imay now, but we will get into it later in the Masechta. Ba'olav imay basically is where let's begin outward. Ba'olav imay seems to be a chayk, okay? There are different answers given to him, but one thing is, if you don't understand the concept, that's perfectly fine, because there's many commentators who don't understand the concept. Okay, it's sort of an unusual exception to the laws of borrowing, which is that if you work together with the owner, with the borrowed animal, then you're exempt. Even if the animal dies suddenly, whatever it is, stolen, you're exempt. Okay, maybe there are explanations, and we'll get to it when we discuss it later on. But the point is that this exemption of ba'olav imay you're working together with the owner exists only by a borrower. And the reason why the Torah repeats the concept of shlichus yad is to tell me that by a watchman you do not have this concept. If you're watching the item and the owner happens to be in the house with you and you're working with it together, you'd have the same level of liability.
So the business about if you have intention that you're liable, how does one know? How do you know that you haven't?
So
how does somebody know?
That's a good question. So I would say that the first thing is that clearly the legal system uses the concept of intention. How do you prove it?
You just have to prove it.
Yeah, well, the typical answer is he did something that could have easily caused harm, and whose only explanation is the intention to inflict harm, but it just didn't.
Yeah.
He hit the animal too many times, and it happens to be a very strong animal. Okay. In the first place, I should note that he has no business hitting the guy's horse. He's not a borrower. He's a watchman, right? The horse is supposed to be in the stables. There's no business hitting it at all. The fact that he hit the horse even once is problematic. Maybe he can justify it if he was moving it from one stable to the next. Okay, but if you see the guy hitting the horse for no reason, you can be pretty sure he's trying to inflict damages. Now, whether the horse is actually damaged or not, that would be the debate here. Does the horse need to be damaged? According to one opinion, yes. According to the other opinion, no. Okay. According to the opinion that says you do have to have a law, so why we still have an extra verse of shlichus yad by Shomer Sachar? Why is it necessary? Okay, one to tell you that there was no exemption of Ba'alavim. I find that let's like the previous opinion. Okay, basically the other shlichus yad is coming to tell me that a Shomer Sachar makes an oath and does not pay kefil. In other words, only a shomer chinam is going to be paying kefil if he says, paying double if he says it was stolen and he lies under oath. Shomer sachar will not pay kefil. Together? Yeah?
I just keep getting mixed up between a shomer.
So an unpaid watchman will pay kefil if he says it was stolen, and a paid watchman will not pay kefil. And that's what we see from this Gzera Shafa, this comparison of verses. I'm sorry, this it's not Gzera Shafa. It's a Yitikrat. So it's from the fact that the Torah specified the concept of damaging an item you're supposed to be watching twice. Okay, let's see the next Mishnah. A guy is watching money. So he took the money, he put it over his shoulder. Bad idea. We'll have to see why. Or he gave them to his kids to watch. And he locked the door, but it wasn't, they could have pushed the door open. He's liable. Because this is not the way to watch things. Why is hanging money over your back not the way to watch things? We'll get to it. If he watched the way he was supposed to, Potter, he's exempt. Says the Gemara, I understand giving it to your kids, not locking the door. These are problems. These are majorly problematic. This is not how you're supposed to watch things. But you put it over, you put it in your briefcase, basically, threw it over your shoulder. What's wrong with that? You have to put the money in your hands. Even though the money is wrapped up in a bag, the correct way to watch money is to hold it in your hands. Okay. And continuing on this topic before we get off topic, Rav Yitzchak says, the person's money should be in his hands. The money should be held in your hands. Okay, now, just to clarify, this verse is not a strict derivation. The money here, the verse here is talking practically speaking. Meaning you're going to have the money in your hands. And you'll go to Jerusalem and you'll buy stuff. I'm talking about Meiser Sheni. But the fact that the verse specifies the money will be in your hands in a sort of as a casual way of describing how you hold money indicates to us that the casual way to hold money is in your hands and not in your briefcase. Make sense?
Okay.
Okay, so now we go a little bit off topic. person should divide up his money in 3 categories. A third of his money should be in the ground. I presume this means real estate.
Not buried.
Yeah, a third of it should be in business, and a third of it should be, cash, ready, liquid. Rav Yitzchak explained that blessing exists only in something that's hidden from the eye. God will command the blessing. Ba'asamecha literally means your granary. But asamecha could also be read in Hebrew as samui, things that are hidden. So in other words, the Torah says the blessing will be in your granary, and Rav Yitzchak interprets that also that the blessing will also be in davar hasamim min ha'ayin, something that's hidden from the eye. We'll explain that in a moment. Blessing is only found in a place where the eye can't see. Just like the granary, so you can't see inside, right? It's sort of this big silo. You don't know how much is inside the silo. Mm-hmm. So therefore, and that's where God sends the blessing. That indicates to us that the place of blessing exists where it isn't counted, it isn't measured yet, it isn't seen. And this is a bit extreme. So guy's going to a silo. He knows he's filled up the whole silo. A whole year he's busy dumping stuff in the hopper and dropping it into the silo. Okay, so finally comes the end of the year. He comes to measure it. He wants to know how much did he yield. So Imari says he's allowed to ask God that there should be more stuff in the silo than there is. Okay, we'll explain. I'll explain to you in a moment. If he starts measuring, he says, blesses God who sends blessing to the silo, to the pile of grain. Let's say he measures the silo. Now he knows he has 3 or 4 or 5 bushels of grain. So then, if he makes the blessing, it's a false blessing. Why? The key component here is, did he know how much he had? Blessing is not found on anything that's measured, on anything that's counted, except for things that are hidden from the eye. God will send the blessing to your granary. Okay, and again, the meaning here is the sort of idea is very simple. For God, it doesn't really make a difference. In other words, God sort of runs the world according to the laws of nature, but it doesn't mean that for God there's any significance to the laws of nature. It's just that's his preferred methods. So if you don't know how much, let's say you actually yielded 4 bushels and God turns it into 5. So you think you had a bumper crop. It doesn't look like it's a miracle. So you can ask God to change it. It's not a big deal. No one's going to know the difference anyway, right? There's nothing. You're not really asking for a miracle because nobody's going to know it's a miracle. That's one of the key. So the key thing, is in order for it to be a miracle, people have to know it's a miracle. Mm-hmm. So you can ask God that there should be more because nobody's going to know the difference. You'll thank God for having an extra good crop that year. But once you measure it, then if there's more, it's a miracle. God doesn't do miracles for no reason. We don't ask or pray for miracles. It's considered a false prayer.
Telling us don't count your money.
So this idea, and again, I'll give you just a quick example of this. There are certain Hasidic circles that if somebody falls ill, they will keep it a major secret. This is not because of medical privacy. There's sort of 2 competing balances here. On one hand, you want to make the illness public, mm-hmm. because this way more people can pray for the person that's ill. But on the other hand, if you keep the illness secret, then it will be less of a miracle if the person gets better, right? So sort of you're making it easier to ask God for a miraculous recovery. Okay, that's the idea. I'm not trying to give a moral judgment here. I'm just telling you that the concept exists. Okay. Amar Shmuel. Shmuel says, "Ksafim ein lam shmira ela b'karka." You want to watch money, you got to put it in real estate. Yeah. I'm just curious, how are they translate the way I am, or is it saying they have to bury it in the ground? How does our school translate that? Amar Shmuel. Ksafim ein lam shmira ela b'karka. No. It doesn't mean that over here. Over here, it means to bury it in the ground. That's what it means. It means to bury in the ground. Yeah. Amar Rava. Rava says, if you give a guy money on Friday afternoon, don't expect him to have time to bury the money in the ground. Okay, but we'll soon see that these things change with time. think metal detectors are a new thing, we have something in store for you today. Isha l'matzai Shabbos, shir l'mikrofinu, l'kavrinu, mechayev. Let's say Shabbos is over and he has time to bury it, but he doesn't bury it. Chayev, he's liable. But if he's a scholar, so we know that the Havdalah candle has to be bright enough that you can tell the difference between two coins. So if he's a scholar, he might actually want to pull out the two coins and actually look for the physical difference. So he has a little bit of extra time to bury the coins. Today that the Gishushai are around, these are people that the metal detector crowd. I think they used to use like a hoe to try to feel out the ground, see where the money was buried. You know? So you have to put it in the roof, in the ceiling. Today you have these people that have these little sticks, they prick out, they knock on the ceiling, try to figure out where the money's hidden. So that's not a good hiding space. Put it between the bricks. One second. That Shmuel agrees that you can hide the money. You can hide the money in the wall as well. Okay. However, now there are people that sort of peer between the bricks. They have this instrumentation. They can sort of figure out if you've hit something in between the bricks. You have to put it either close to the floor, in the wall, close to the floor, close to the ceiling, because that far they don't check. It's too difficult. Ravacha, the son of Rav Yosef, says to Rav Ashi, Hasam Tanan, we learned in the Mishnah in Pesachim, Chametz shenafal al ma'pilos. You have chametz, and a wall fell down and fell over the chametz. Harei kamevor, it's as if you destroy the chametz. Rav Shimon Gamliel Omer, Kol she'ein hakel v'yachal chapes akrav. The definition of it being destroyed is that a dog can't find it. Okay, how much is it? Tana Kamma chafishus kelev. How far can a dog smell? Gimel tfachim. Whatever is roughly 9 to 12 inches. So Gemara says, Hachamai. Well, what about money? Mi be'inin shleishet tfachim I like. Can the dog sniff the money or not? So what did you think? Can the dog sniff the money? Not quite, because the money doesn't have a smell. We're talking about money here as coins.
Even after it's been touched with people and held and everything.
I guess so. Over there, it's because the item, chametz, the food has a smell to it, so the dog is able to look for it. However, but over here, it's for it's for sort of hiding it away from a thief. You don't need to do three tfachim. You don't have to do the full 9 inches. The Kamma, how deep into the wall does it need to be? Rav from Sichros, the Rav from the town of Sichros says tefach. It's just a hand's breadth, 3 to 4 inches. Okay, next story. A very interesting story. It's a very clever guy. So he knew that the thieves are looking out for him. So what did he do? He hid the money in a trap, in a bird trap. So not quite the place you'd expect to hide for the thieves to be looking for money. What happened? Sure enough, this guy had the thieves are really out for him, and igniv, it was stolen anyway. Rav Yosef, so Rav Yosef points out here, while it's true that it was a good idea to make sure the thieves don't get it, but how on the other side, if there was a fire, this sort of, so just basically how to describe this. This is by the way a classical Talmudical structure. You talk about classical Talmudic things. This is a classical Talmudic thing. What do? You take these open palm branches, right? You tie them together at the top, and you tie them together at the bottom. So it sort of looks like a dome. It's tied together at the top, okay. Dome out to the outside, and then it's tied together on the bottom, and it's on the floor. And what happens? You put a food inside, and the birds fly in, and apparently they can't fly out because they're sort of intimidated by the things. They can fly in, they can't get out. Okay. So this thing obviously is not quite fire safe. So if there's a fire, this thing is going to burn very quickly. So you're negligent because if there would have been a fire, it would have burned very quickly. Even though it was a good idea to hide the money there, but you're negligent. Okay, so what's this called? This is called initially you were negligent, but it turns out in the end it was beyond your control. So therefore chayav, you're liable for that. And some say some say that it doesn't make a difference. The fact that there was negligence if there would have been a fire, you would have been negligent for putting money in the bird trap. It doesn't make a difference. Ultimately speaking, there was no fire. There were thieves, extremely clever thieves, that sort of figured out where the money was. So if that's the case, then that is considered. You are not considered to be negligent. You're considered honest, beyond your control, and you're exempt. Okay. The general rule here is that if you start off with negligence, again, negligence because if there was a fire, it would have burnt very quickly. And at the end, there was an inus, it was beyond his control. Chayav, you're liable. So the final conclusion of the Gemara is that you would be liable.
But it would be under control.
Because initially you were negligent. So therefore, even if at the end, for example, let's say a guy's watching an ox, okay? And he takes the ox and he parks it in the street, okay? And he walks away and goes to the convenience store. Yeah, and then a snake comes out and bites the ox and kills it. It's a perfect example. A snake bite is considered an inus. There's nothing you can do about it. There's no way you can protect an animal from a snake bite. However, the fact that you left it in the street was crazy. You should never have left it in the street. So the final conclusion of the Gemara is you are liable. You are liable. Even though technically speaking, the actual method of death would have happened anywhere. There's no way to protect against it. But it doesn't make a difference. The fact that you were negligent to sort of leave an ox in the street makes you liable. Okay, next story. There was one guy who gave money to his friend to watch. He said, I'd like my money back. I don't know where I put it. Sounds familiar, right? He went to Rava. He says, it's a silly argument. You're negligent. Still shlim, go pay him. This is the thing. I don't know where I put it. What does that mean? Out. Tell it to my kids, right? I don't know. If you don't know, you're negligent. There's a person who gave money to his friend to watch. What happens? He hands it over to his mother to watch it. She puts it in a chest. The igniv, and it was stolen. So Rav has a question. What do I do now? Maybe I should go tell the watchman to pay for it. Amar, he says, anyone who gives me an item to watch knows that I might hand it over to my parents or my family members to assist in the watching. Okay. So maybe go tell the guy's mother, Zil Shlimu, go pay for the fact that it was stolen. But that won't work because I didn't know that it wasn't his money. I thought the mother says, I thought I was watching my son's money. I didn't realize I was watching a third party's money. Because if I would have, I would have buried it. So the Gemara says, law. So why can't we be upset at the son for not telling his mother? So Amar, he would say, So the son says, what do you mean? If I tell my mother that it was my money, for sure she'd watch it even better than if I told her it was my friend's money, where she wouldn't watch it as well. So actually, I was actually doing a good thing for my friend by not telling my mother that it was my friend's money. So, right, sort of everybody here is passing the buck to the next guy. And the question that Rav has to deal with is, where does it stop? Rav says, the watchman makes an oath that he gave the money to his mother. And the mother makes an oath that she watched it by putting the money in the chest. And it was stolen without her participation. She wasn't involved in the theft. Upater, and they're both exempt. Okay, we get to another similar story with the buck passing story. Who apturta diasmi? There was this what do you call it? Custodian of Yisayim, of orphans. The Zavan who tur liasmi umasi lebikra. This is a weird story. So he buys an ox, and he hands it over immediately to a shepherd, whatever, I don't know what you call a bikra. I don't know what the English word is. He's a shepherd for cattle. What? Herdsman. Thank you. Herdsman. So he hands over the animal to a herdsman. What's the problem here? Havalu, loy havalu kichi v'shini. It had no teeth. In English, the guy was really taken for a ride here. Lemechel, to eat. Umis, and it died from hunger. Couldn't eat. So Amar Rambar Kamma, how are judges going to rule in this case? Let's do the buck passing here. So let's blame the custodian. Namely, the apotropos zil shlim. Let's say the apotropos, she should have to pay. So Amar Anolabakra Masartia, I handed it over to a herdsman. Namely, the bakra zil shlim. Go tell the herdsman to pay because the animal died under his control. Amar, he says, I put the animal with the other animals. I gave it food. I wasn't paying attention to notice whether or not it was eating or not. So the Gemara says, let's examine this. So in other words, he argues, the herdsman says, I'm also exempt because I had no way of knowing this animal doesn't have any teeth. So the Gemara says, hold on a second. Let's examine this. Bakra, the herdsman, Shamar Sachar. He's the equivalent of a paid watchman, right? He's paid to bring the animal in the herd and bring it out to pasture every day. So he's a paid watchman. He should have been careful. To make sure that there's no loss to the orphans. If he knew that the animal belonged to an orphan, then he should have been extra careful. So Gemara says, he says, you're right. You're right. With regard, the problem here is, in other words, if the animal the ox belonged to an orphan, it deserved special treatment. But what's going on here? It's true the animal belonged to an orphan, but the claim was no longer on the orphans. Why? What happened here? The orphans are suffering no loss. Why? Because the original owner, the guy who sold the trustee, the custodian, the animal, he offered a refund. He realized he sold an animal without teeth. They collected money from the original seller because he sold an animal without teeth. Who's laying claim here? So what happens is the original owner is now fighting with the herdsman. The herdsman says, I'm exempt. The original owner says, you got to reimburse me because the animal died. You weren't careful. But 1 second. So the Gemara says, well, the seller should have notified the buyer. So the Gemara says, my made the yoda to make a toys have. Okay, so in other words, the owner understands that the purchase was an error. Why? Because okay, so because it was sold through a broker who flips animals very quickly. So the broker didn't even look at the animal to see if it had teeth. It just buys and he sells it a moment later. So the original owner has to reimburses the orphans for the loss. But at the same time, you sort of the custodian sort of exempt from even knowing the animal didn't have teeth and handing it over to the herdsman because he didn't check, and the guy who sold it to him didn't check either. Someone says, what's the final story? Okay, what happens here is the broker says that he didn't know the animal didn't have teeth, and the herdsman has to pay the sort of minimal loss. He pays the value of the animal had it been able to be slaughtered, because obviously an animal that doesn't have teeth you're going to slaughter. It's the best way to deal with it. So you pay the value of the meat that you would have had from that animal at the lowest price range, and the herdsman is liable. Okay. Okay. I have a tomorrow and Friday will not be here. My brother is getting engaged. I'll be flying in for the engagement party. Thank you.